In 2001, Super Smash Bros. Melee shipped with a simple 2-button input that would define the game's competitive identity for the next 2 decades. Jump, and then air dodge into the ground. Sakurai and his team actually clocked this during development. In early 2002, on a forum on the official Smash Bros. Website, Sakurai himself explained the mechanics behind it to a junior high student who had discovered the technique with Luigi. Simply put, wavedashing wasn't a glitch. But using it as a full-on movement option to microspace, punish, or reposition while keeping your options open, that part might have been a little bit less intended. But when indie plat fighters started emerging, think games like Rivals of Aether, maybe Icon, Rushdown Revolt even, almost all of them put wavedashing back in. Hell, even games in the general platforming genre like Celeste and the aptly named Waveland, or games as ubiquitous as Rocket League, prominently feature the technique as a core component of mobility. These were not accidents or exploits, but rather intentional, baked-in design choices. The mechanics Smash developers chose not to keep became the foundation an entire genre was built on. As a result, one of modern Smash's most persistent debates is whether or not wavedashing should return in its full glory, or more generally, whether skill-expressive mechanics like it even belong in a casual game like Smash in the first place. So join me today as I dive into the history of wavedashing, and show exactly why it caught on in some spaces, but perhaps, ironically, not so much in the place where it originated. Thank you to ZocDoc, who is paid to partner with me in today's video. So I've been partnered with ZocDoc for a few months now, so anyone who actually listens to these integrations probably already knows that almost everyone I know in the city uses ZocDoc to find and book their doctor appointments. ZocDoc is a free site where you can search for doctors by specialty, filter by your insurance, and actually see thousands of verified patient reviews. So you can get a pretty good idea of what you're getting into before you book. This was like way before I started getting regular sponsor segments on this channel, but I actually did use ZocDoc to find my primary care when I moved to the city a few years ago, and they've been pretty solid. I basically just used their search engine to find a nearby medical spot that took my insurance and got in the next day for my annual physical. Turns out I'm a beacon of physical health, aside from the 5 cups of coffee I drink a day to keep making dumb videos for you guys. But anyway, ZocDoc has over 200 specialties in all 50 states, and you can do in-person or video visits, whichever one you prefer. Once again, as much of a disclaimer I can make when it comes to this stuff, but obviously use your own discretion when reading reviews and deciding what a good health fit for you is. These sites are merely suggestions, not replacements for healthcare, but it is important to take care of yourself. So if you're interested, you can go to ZocDoc.com/turndownforWalt or click the link in the description to find and book a top-rated in-network doctor today. Thanks again to ZocDoc for supporting the channel, and I hope you enjoy today's video. Okay, so every competitive game rewards mechanical skill. That's not a thing that's unique to Melee. What's unique is where Melee's skill expression comes from. In most fighting games, the execution barrier is designed. You're meant to learn quarter circle inputs, charge motions, frame links. Those are just core mechanics that are almost required to even function in a competitive space. The game teaches you these things exist, even if mastering them takes years. In Melee, the techniques that define high-level play, wave dashing, wave landing, moonwalking, dash dancing, ledge dashing, etc., weren't exactly designed as the competitive foundation. Players discovered them, either intentionally or not, developed them, and built the entire competitive meta around them. It's exactly why people say that the skill ceiling for Smash is practically infinite, and it's also why these movement techniques have become almost mandatory skill sets to compete at a competent level. What makes it even harder is that almost none of this is universal. Every character has a different jump squat, or the amount of frames until you're actionable after pressing jump. The distance varies too. Luigi, who's generally seen as the tutorial character for learning wave dashing, since he has attraction value that makes the window for hitting a wave dash a lot more generous, has the longest wave dash in the game. Which, yeah, look at that, another Luigi mention on my channel. You got me. God damn it, okay. Anyway, the idea of wave dashing as a movement concept isn't that unique to Melee either. Other fighting games had similar mechanics, from Tekken's crouch dashing to MVC's version of the same movement, but I'd argue the term is so, spiritually tied to Melee at this point that they're practically synonymous. As a very general explainer for this, when you wave dash, you're essentially repositioning while also standing still. You move, but you keep all of your grounded options open. In a game where committing to one movement option usually means giving another up, wave dashing kind of lets you have your cake and eat it too. And it doesn't exist in a vacuum either. The bones of wave dashing can serve as a connective tissue to even more advanced techniques, like the wave shine. Fox's shine can be jump canceled, and a jump happens to be the start of a wave dash, so suddenly you've got this chain where one mechanic unlocks a stronger, more advanced mechanic. So I'd argue that this one mechanic unlocks so much of what makes Melee feel so magical, expressive movement, but it's also practically a prerequisite to compete. So when you zoom out and look at what Smash is actually designed to be, a casual, beginner-friendly game with some of the most popular IPs of all time, is that healthy for the game? Because the competitive side of Smash is a tiny fraction of the people who play what is fundamentally a party game. What we engage with is a very selective slice of the full Super Smash Bros. Experience. I think it would be a genuine PR nightmare for Nintendo if little 8-year-old Timmy opened his brand new Smash game on Christmas morning and immediately got bodied so bad he never wanted to play again. And this isn't even a hypothetical either. As of writing this video, we are watching this play out in real time with Invincible Versus, where brand new fighting game players are rage quitting against experienced pros.
Rage quit already?
I guess an argument you could make against wavedashing in particular is, well, it's not actually that hard. The input is 2 buttons after all, about as mechanically demanding as running and jumping in Mario, as my good friend Adam Kara once pointed out. Also, Adam, this is a PSA that I miss you dearly and I would love for you to make videos again, so you should do that. But I'd say the reason it feels advanced isn't necessarily the execution. It's because 1, wavedashing is not expressly stated in the manual that it's a thing you can do, and 2, no game has ever properly taught players why they should use it. In a single-player game like Celeste, the level design forces you to learn the movement mechanics in order to progress. But in a multiplayer fighting game, some random guy beating your ass for 20 straight games using a forbidden jutsu you've never seen in your life probably makes you want to learn it for yourself or just give up.
Welcome to the real world!
At its core, this is just a knowledge check, and it makes kind of a catch-22. It's probably one of the biggest reasons wavedashing haters label it as elitist, not because the mechanic itself is some impossible barrier to overcome. So I think the question then becomes, are mechanics like these really the gatekeeping problem some people make them out to be? Let's step away from Melee and look at the games that took what made it so iconic and actually built their systems around it to try to answer that. So after Brawl came out and stripped away most of Melee's emergent mechanics, there was a real divide in the competitive community and in how people saw the future of the series. But when you look at indie plat fighters, like 95% of them, the design influence is from Melee, not Brawl, Smaforge, or Ultimate. Whether that's a character that plays like Fox, movement options like dash dancing and wave dashing, or in Icon's case of, just copying the whole game, like that's just Marth. Those are the same picture, but the good ones don't rip it wholesale. They take Melee's happy little accidents and rebuild them with intention. I'd say Rivals of Aether 2 is probably the best example in modern years. You can wave dash, but the input is easier, the execution is far more forgiving, and the gap in wave dash distances is much smaller across the cast. What this means is that the technique, which is largely in the same form factor as it was in Melee, is just universally easier to pick up and implement in your gameplay. Crouch canceling, which is a defensive countermeasure that allows you to cancel the knockback of attacks while you're crouching, is in there too, but Rivals built intentional counterplay around it. Moonwalking's available with an easier half-circle motion. I think you get what I'm trying to say. Everything is streamlined and easier, but none of it in Rivals feels that dumbed down. Just like in Melee, the wave dash isn't working in isolation. It's woven into Rivals' movement, and combined with Rivals' own original mechanics, the game feels buttery smooth to move around in. Rivals 2 is also considered a melting pot of players from completely different competitive scenes. You've got top players from Rivals 1, Melee, and Project M, all games heavily featuring these kinds of mechanics, but what about players from games that didn't have wave dashing? Sandstorm, one of the goats of Brawlhalla, consistently makes top cut at majors, and I find the Brawlhalla crossover pretty unique because if you play on controller in that game, the default inputs for one of their core movement techniques, dash jumping, has basically the reverse button presses from that of a wave dash, which is pretty tough muscle memory to fix. I can tell you this because I'm still really bad at it. Anyway, Spargo, formerly the #1 Ultimate player, has also made podium multiple times, and then Beastly, a globally ranked ult player with only modest Melee experience, just won Genesis, one of the biggest plat fighter tournaments in the world. These players don't have years of muscle memory with wave dashing and wave landing, and they're still some of the best in this game. By taking functionally the same mechanic and making it both easier to learn and easier to execute, the barrier to entry for newer players becomes significantly reduced. And this pattern isn't exactly new to the genre. While players with years of experience will generally triumph over newcomers regardless of any simplification of mechanics, that doesn't mean new blood can't break through. In Melee, I've talked plenty about Rat Monster and Dial M, but even Street Fighter, a legacy franchise with over 3 decades of history, there's young players like Blaz and Mickey making huge waves against veterans who were competing before they were even born, which is nuts. So no, I don't really think Melee's emergent mechanics are the barrier people may think they are. I don't really know if mechanics like wave dashing were ever the barrier to begin with. These things add depth that have kept the game fresh for over 2 decades. And watching how newer games iterate on that foundation is, in my opinion, one of the most exciting things happening in the genre right now. But with all of this said, I think this discussion raises a totally different question, which is, does Smash actually need Melee's physics engine to produce interesting competitive gameplay? The short answer is no, it doesn't, but it probably makes it look more fun to a trained eye. But let's quickly rewind back to that player-based split in the Melee to Brawl transition, because if wave dashing is this good and an entire genre of games agrees that it is, why did Smash walk away from it? The obvious answer there is that Smash was never trying to be what the competitive community turned it into. But even though Brawl took away most of what we've been talking about, it wasn't some barren wasteland of tech. Brawl introduced things like Dacus, RARs, momentum canceling, glide tossing, the list goes on. All of these mechanics were introduced or even exclusive to Brawl, and that last one arguably hit harder in Brawl than it ever would have in Melee because Brawl's meta just had more viable item-based characters to take advantage of it. Smash 4 introduced perfect pivots, which turned grounded microspacing into a core part of its neutral game. Ultimate doesn't have as much in the way of universal groundbreaking tech, but it has slingshotting, wall jump cancel ledge grabs, and even a very nerfed version of wave dashing. One with way more end lag, sure, but still useful for baiting attacks or landing on platforms faster than finishing a full jump arc. Where Ultimate makes up for this is in its piles and piles of character-specific tech. Steve practically gets his own dissertation written on all the fun and game-warping bullshit he can do, and this in and of itself is probably a big reason he's inarguably top 1 in the game. Hey, there's a nightmarish thought experiment. Imagine if Steve could place a block and instantly wave land off it. Wouldn't that be sick? But here's what I think is actually interesting about all of this. In the vast sea of plat fighters out there that take at least some inspiration from Melee, the more modern Smash titles not having something as ubiquitous as wave dashing is what makes them stand out. Later entries dialed in on more of a commitment to grounded movement, Smash 4 with fast shields or Ultimate with dash canceling, trading off movement in exchange for a more deliberate look at neutral. The games and their core mechanics have diverted perhaps heavily from what the wave dash might have promised, but the depth is still there at really any competitive level. So in closing, it doesn't really matter which game you play. The best players aren't the best just because they've mastered some random mechanic. They're the best because they put in the work across everything the game asks of them. Tech skill is just one piece of that puzzle, and it usually creates a damn fun piece of the puzzle at that. But I think the more realistic and maybe boring answer to the wave dashing question is that it's already resolved itself. The mechanic probably caught on everywhere else because those games were designed for players who wanted to have that kind of skill expression. Think Rivals of Aether, Rushdown Revolt, and even Celeste in its own way. Smash moved away from it probably in part because it was trying to serve a fundamentally different and way broader audience. I don't think either of those approaches are necessarily wrong. Especially in the Big 2-6, this town is absolutely big enough for the both of us. If you want the freedom and the expressiveness that wave dashing unlocks, there are plenty more games offering that than ever before. If you want what modern Smash does differently, a perhaps more casually minded experience, but with depth that could just as easily have you going down the competitive rabbit hole, that's there too. So yeah, I don't think wave dashing necessarily died with Smash. I think it's just found a new home. Thanks for watching. Big thanks to my top tier patrons and YouTube members. You can check those links out if you feel like supporting the channel and you, more importantly, have the disposable income to do so. Thank you to Avishua Stein, Bobby Wasabi, Brent Mukai, Carter Roberts, Dark Gen X, Eric is Cool, Gustavo Cantu Fernandez, James Fabman, Justin Duncan Mills, Kyle Carlin, Marshall Bradley, Michael Talamo, Prakar Sinha, Rosewood, and Sam Wright.